I'm the chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission, and with my other commissioners and the town of Hartford, we welcome you to this very interesting talk. Neil Silberman is our researcher who has come up with an amazing compendium of history of the town of Hartford and entertainment and various sorts of, what would you say, expressions of
every form of the performing arts.
there you go. So we're hoping that, in a way, I hope some more people, maybe from some of the theater groups might be in as evidence, but...
Okay, well, I'm going to start. The show is going to begin now. And I just wanted to say a few thank yous at the beginning. This has been a long and continuing research about performing arts in Hartford from the very beginning, from the very settlement of the town to the present. And I want to thank particularly not only the Historic Preservation Commission for being so helpful and patient with me and understanding during this long research into things that are really not very well documented at all. And I want to give special thanks to Pat Stark, who's on the Historic Preservation Commission and the Hartford Historical Society, for helping me with all kinds of questions and lots of images, some of which you will see tonight. And also David Briggs, the living encyclopedia of the cultural economy in Hartford. So, as you can see, this is a project, a very unusual project for historic preservation commissions that usually are dealing with what we call tangible heritage, that is, buildings that have survived over the years. But as we will see, there are many buildings, very important buildings in the history of the performing arts in Hartford that are long gone. And we only have pictures and newspaper accounts and some diaries and written records. And really, the key in this whole project, I really take from the ideals and the vision of the Historic Preservation Commission, which in the announcement of this project said, and I will read it and you can see it so it doesn't have to be a reading lesson here, that a town's history is not just about recording the past. This is certainly true with performing arts. It's about how it connects and informs the present and influences the future. It's a living history that we can engage in today. It's also an integral part of how our community has developed over time. Now, there are lots of things, obviously, that go on today in Hartford and its villages. Among the many things are, of course, all the stage productions in recent years that everybody knows about, whether it's Northern Stage or whether it is the Briggs Opera House and Jam, the White River Indie Film Festival, and all kinds of stuff. Now, it isn't just a lot of stuff happening. If we start to think about it, it really is part of a creative economy. It's something that, as the Historical Society said, is very important for the future as well as recording the past. Now, what is a creative economy? A creative economy is basically, as you can see in the yellow, it's composed of the creative industries. That is, all kinds of things that people in some way or another create new things. It's all about creative places as well, where people know that they can go and they can enjoy or even participate in creativity. There's the creative talent, And most important of all, there is this creative convergence. There's a sort of synergy that all the talents of people in Hartford, in this case, go to create, as you see in the orange, jobs and income from the creative enterprises. But it's not just ticket sales or subscriptions. It's also, as you can see in the lower thing, all the other jobs and secondary economic effects that come from creativity, whether it is restaurants or all kinds of local businesses that are attracted, in our case, by the performing arts. And at the end, in the green circle there, you see wealth created in the region. Now, what I want to stress here is that the wealth is not only monetary. It is a wealth of experiences, of knowledge, of enjoyment, of reflection that comes out of this creative economy, which is a very different kind of thing than other kinds of industrial economies that produce products and so forth, and they go away and they're sold, and some people don't even know where they're made. Now, the creative economy in Hartford is composed of many segments. We know that when we're talking about the Center for Cartoon Studies, or the Tip Top building and everything that Matt Busey has built, or all kinds of crafts and so forth, they're definitely creative. But I, thanks to the project plan of the Historic Preservation Commission, has concentrated on performing arts. So that's a very specific thing, and I just want to spend a moment trying to define what we mean by performing arts. Performing arts is basically creativity that is done in public. It's not something that is movable like some sort of a craft work or some sort of a product, a painting that can be sold and taken away. It is about an experience. And basically in Hartford, it's been a wide range of public performances, from music to drama to lectures to monologues to dance. Even ballroom dancing is a kind of performing art. And we'll be talking about the whole history from the beginning. Now, it may seem, how would someone do a history of the performing arts? Because they change with time. They're, as I said, in places that no longer exist. And they're just scattered with, every dance school that performs a recital in public. That's part of the performing arts. So the question is, how do we tell the story of performing arts in Hartford? And here's a picture of one of the high school plays in Hartford. I wasn't able to identify what the play is, but you can see someone holding a gun to a clown, which is pretty provocative. Okay, so how do we tell the story? Well, I decided that the best way, because performing arts are changing all the time, public tastes are changing all the time, it's not just one thing. So basically, I tried to arrange the performing arts in Hartford into these various periods. They're not exact periods, some overlap, but each period represents a sort of a different kind of performing arts experience that the people of Hartford and its villages enjoy. And so we will go through this. I will try to be as brief as possible. I have submitted a very long report that goes into much greater detail about each period and the personalities involved in each period. But let's start by going back to the very beginning. As we all know, Hartford was established by a grant from the governor of New Hampshire in 1761, and very soon afterwards, primarily a group from eastern Connecticut, from Windham County, from Lebanon, decided that things were getting very crowded down there. That was already the second move. These were all descendants of the Puritan settlers of New England, and they came up and settled Hartford. Now, I do make the point that we really can't be sure, even before the settlement, when performing arts, that is the idea of entertainment in public or creativity in public, really started, because there have been studies about Native American call and respond, dances and songs and so forth, but we really don't know anything about that. The history, the recorded history really begins with the settlement in 1761, the 1760s, because it wasn't all at once. And the people who settled in Hartford brought with them the traditions that they had inherited from their ancestors, and their ancestors had inherited from the British Isles. There's wonderful work that was done in the 30s by Helen Hartness Flanders for the Vermont Arts Council, and she went around everywhere, including Hartford, to collect old ballads and songs that the older people in the 30s still remembered. It's very hard to date precisely when folk songs begin. All we know is that the primary performance that they brought with them from Connecticut were musical instruments, flutes, and violins. You see a 18th century violin there, and there are records of groups getting together in the very earliest days of settlement for husking bees and song fests and so forth. So that's really where performing arts begins in Hartford, not for money, but for a kind of participatory experience that the performers were also the audience. And these took place outside, they took place in homes and so forth. If, however, you were going to identify someone who established what we recognize as performing arts today, it would be this person, or this couple really, and that's Free Grace Leavitt and Jerusha Leavitt, his wife, who were born and raised in Suffield, Connecticut, right on the border of New Hampshire. And the interesting thing about this couple, and again, you'll read the report and you'll find out about it, they were adherents of the first Great Awakening, a kind of spiritual wave that in the 18th century swept through New England with sort of spirit-infused enthusiasm in response to the very, very strict Puritan attitude toward performing arts. And in 1794, they built the Free Grace Levitt Tavern or Inn, which still stands and is still used. And this was in Centertown, and it really was the first place where travelers and residents of Hartford could assemble and dance, as I will explain, and even listen to recorded music. Because Free Grace had a possession that he really loved. And that was somehow he got a musical clock that played 6 tunes, among them Yankee Doodle and The Campbells Are Coming Home. And he insisted that he play those songs at every mealtime so that the people who were eating at his tavern, staying at his tavern, would be amazed at this recorded music. But more important even was the fact that on the second floor he had a large hall. And because he was really a product of the Great Awakening, he allowed very certain kinds of contra dancing that was used to express the joy in God and so forth. And here's just a picture of a contemporary dance, not necessarily from the Free Grace Levitt Inn, which I couldn't obviously locate that. Now the other thing, 2 other things about Free Grace Levitt. He was a character known around town. In fact, he served as the town clerk from something like 1802 to 1828, and his inn, his tavern, became the town hall at that time. But Free Grace Levitt was also a deacon in the church in Centertown, and he was the song leader. And basically, there's a very distinctive style of singing the Psalms. I mean, you've probably, or some of you may know of the Bay Psalm book, which is the oldest, which was the first book published in America, in fact, in Boston. And basically, it was the Psalms from the Bible put to music, and it became a very distinctive New England musical tradition. In fact, you can, or the historians have determined through notation, because this later was translated into what's called shape singing, that people could then read the music rather than in musical notation. And the kind of influence of the Great Awakening was to make it much livelier. And Free Grace Levitt would blow on his pitch pipe and lead the psalms, the psalmody every Sunday. And also, there were 2 services on Sunday, and in between the morning and the afternoon service, all the congregation that had wandered from all the villages to Centertown would go up to his tavern, and I'm sure he played his musical clock. Now, that was really the situation for many decades through the post-revolutionary period into the early 19th century, where the two media of performing arts were really folk songs and folk music, and on the other hand, church music. And there was, at least in some of the conservative members of the Vermont legislature, a real antagonism to any kind of performing art, because they felt that it was ungodly and it made people crazy and whatever. So in 1836, a senator named Harvey Bell passed a law that all circus riding, theatrical exhibitions, juggling or sleight of hand, ventriloquism, and magic arts shall be and are declared to be common public nuisances and offenses against this state, with a fine of $200, which was an enormous amount in 1836. Now, this law remained on the books until 1880, but it was really not observed, and as you will see, people were still very much into this idea of public and collective expression. So we move to the next era, which is, let me just move this here. The next era is entertainment by rail. The arrival of the railroads in 1848 created many, many changes in the economy and society of Hartford. And it allowed for the first time entertainers from the big cities of New York and Boston not to take the long trek and face, you know, hostility on the way up. And in fact, it was also the origin of two of the important hotels in town that in fact featured entertainment, as we will see. One was the Junction House, which is on the spot of the Hotel Coolidge today through its various iterations and fires and rebuilding and so forth. And it was built, it was commissioned by Colonel Samuel Nutt, who we'll meet again in another connection, who was a ferry boat owner and a big landowner in White River Junction, which really was very sparsely populated. And strangely enough, he didn't build this thing. He found a hotel that had gone out of business in Enfield, New Hampshire. And he had that hotel taken apart and hauled across to White River Junction and rebuilt there. And the idea of the trains coming in and hotels, there's a lot more traffic than before the coming of the railroads, when Hartford was really a purely rural settlement. And so you begin to get, after the train in the 1850s and the 1860s, entertainers that came by train, and they were a strange lot. They were people who, whether they thought that they could make money in uncharted territory or didn't succeed in the big cities, came up. And here are just three of them that passed through Hartford, particularly in Quechee, where mills were already starting to operate, and there were both workers and employers that were looking for entertainment. On the left, you have a famous guy, Dandy Jim from Caroline, who was an African-American dancer and singer. And I have to just say that although we frown on it now, until the 20s or 30s, black-face minstrels, this guy was an African-American, but black-faced minstrelsy was very popular in the various venues, particularly the Opera House. In the center, and we'll get back to this, was the Mendelssohn Club of Boston that came and performed concerts in the hotels around. I'll mention another hotel, and that comical Brown, who was a monologuist. He was a comedian, what we would today call a stand-up comedian. He came by train with this whole cast of characters that you can see in the poster. But the really big change that began to take place in the 1850s and the 1860s was the transformation of dance. Dance, as I had shown, was really in rows, men and women separated, but by the 1850s, it became a kind of social ritual that marked people who were shopkeepers, managers at the mills, people of some, and professionals, of course, doctors and lawyers. It became a sign of being in high society. And up till this time, up till, the middle of the 19th century, I would say that there wasn't a lot of social differentiation. Sure, there were people that owned more land than others, but generally there wasn't this idea of going out in formal dress and meeting your social equals. And on the right is a very interesting character. His name was Abram Pushee. That's P-U-S-H-E-E. He was a musician that had come on a tour up to northern New England, and he decided to settle in Lebanon. And he became what they call a dance master. He set up his shop in Lebanon, and also had lots of people from Hartford who would learn the waltz and the cotillion and the quadrille and so forth. And here I have another picture. This is the second hotel after the Junction House. This is Pease's Hall in his hotel, which is really, it's right, there's now a convenience store where it was, and that too went through many iterations and fires and so forth. But you can see on the right an advertisement for a New Year's ball at Pease's Hall, and Abram Pushee was the conductor of those dances. So what we have in the middle of the 19th century were the beginnings of isolated performers who would pass through and go on a circuit, as well as very regular dress balls on special occasions, or on other occasions that the fraternal societies and other groups in the town would hold. So that's another this railroad period from 1848 to about 1889, when Pease Hotel burnt to the ground. There's another period that begins. And here we're moving into a much more professional kind of era of performance, and that is the Gates Opera House and the vaudeville circuit. We all know this building now as the Briggs Block and the Briggs Opera House, but in fact it was commissioned in 1890 by a wealthy heiress, May Gates, who was the daughter of a large landowner in White River Junction, and he was also not only on the board of the first bank established, but he was the local director of the telegraph office in White River Junction. And he invented something. This is not performing arts, but it's an interesting thing. He and an assistant figured out mathematically how to time the departures and arrivals of trains throughout northern New England by having a system, a coded system, where along the line they would, the station managers, would telegraph that such and such a train had just arrived and just departed. And it was, in fact, the whole basis not only of train coordination, but even air traffic control, and made a fortune with that. But he died in 1887 and left his daughter, May, to do what she would. Now, this was exactly the time that the opera house movement was spreading across the country. There's a lot of literature on this because it's the next stage after those formal dances. It is the idea that the civic leaders of a community wanted to make their town more cultured. They wanted to provide the classics of drama and the most famous musicians and so forth. And all across the country, you see, not only in Vermont there are lots of opera houses, as you know, but all across the country in this period they were built. Now, this was a major undertaking that the opera house, as you can see, was on the second floor, as it still is, but it was much larger, and it had, this is a view from the balcony down to the orchestra, facing the
West.
yeah, okay, let me just think, the short end, the narrow end of the hall, with a proscenium stage and so forth. But the interesting thing about May Gates, there are a number of interesting and spicy details about May Gates, but one of them is that she wanted this opera house to be lighted with electricity, not gas. And in fact, and it's quite amazing for a single woman of her age, about 30, she in fact created electric turbine across the river in the Mascoma River that eventually went on to light up all of the Upper Valley. And the Opera House was the first place that electricity was used. Now, as much as May Gates, who passed away in 1900, only 10 years after she commissioned the Opera House, wasn't exactly the kind of high-level classics that she had originally imagined. This was also the time of the expansion of vaudeville, which began to be a very organized tour of all kinds of acts that would come in by train and stop at each town. And among the many acts that appeared in the Gates Opera House at that time were all kinds of minstrels and singing groups, and even, as you can see, Maro the magician, and lots of melodramas as well, that were very popular entertainment, very accessible. And the way that the Opera House was set up is that the most expensive seats, obviously, were at the beginning, and the workers and so forth were up in the balcony. And they had lots of nationally known vaudeville acts that came to White River Junction to appear at the Opera House. Now, one of the most confusing of these acts, and they were anything you can imagine, were these performing horses. And I don't know how they got the performing horses up the stairs of the Opera House and on the stage. But they did, because Professor Bristol brought his educated horses in the 1890s to White River Junction. Now, as with everything, and I'm really going briefly over this, and I hope that everyone will get the chance eventually to read my full report, which really lists all the acts and anecdotes and so forth. But like every other form of entertainment, vaudeville eventually died for a number of reasons. And in fact, by the 1920s, in the Gates Opera House at that time, there were more and more basketball games and boxing matches and wrestling matches and really sort of more seamy kind of, adults only performances that were a kind of niche attraction. So by the 1930s, really, the Opera House, it was long past the time of vaudeville, and the original managers of the Opera House had long gone. And as we know, White River Junction became just a sort of another railroad junction, but the Opera House, which you can see on the right there, beyond the Hotel Coolidge, went dark. It didn't have performances except for very rarely. And I should mention something that David Briggs made me aware of. The Gates Opera House was not designed like elaborate opera houses like the Barry Opera House and so forth. It had a flat floor in which chairs were set, and then the balcony, and it was really meant to be sort of an all-purpose civic space. And as the years went on, in addition to vaudeville or the occasional sporting events, there were all kinds of political rallies. There were even town meetings held there. But the Gates Opera House sort of went dark. We'll talk about what happened to it in a few minutes. Also, at the time when the Gates Opera House was performing, there was something else going on in White River Junction. And that was another whole genre of performing arts, which were outdoor spectacles. This was really popular at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. And the first place where they performed, was an area known as Nuts Meadow, which is now George Ratcliffe Park, where the baseball fields are and so forth. But it was very convenient to the rail line, and so the big traveling shows were able to come on special trains to perform. And certainly one of the most famous was the beginning of Barnum's Circus that eventually merged with Ringling Brothers and Bailey to be, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. And here you see on the right, you see a picture of Nuts Meadow filled with the big tops, these enormous canvas tents that were on special cars, and an advertisement for the appearance of Jumbo the elephant, who later died. But the point is that this was like having a national superstar appear. In fact, the capacity of the Big Top was 20,000 people. And so when you're considering the population of the Upper Valley, people came from all around to see the two shows that Barnum put on here. But there was an even more famous, or equally famous, performer that came to White River Junction, not once but twice, and that was Buffalo Bill and his Wild West show, who appeared in White River Junction in 1895 for the first time, with his, enormous cast and custom-made train of Indians, cowboys, and it was more than a rodeo, and extremely popular, to say the least. And in fact, the local newspaper, the Landmark, said in its review of Buffalo Bill's Wild West coming to White River Junction, that it was like a tour of the West in 3 hours. And so people came from all around to see Buffalo Bill and his troupe. Now, eventually, the area for outdoor spectacles moved. And it moved up to a place that was called, in its day, Billings Park. Up on both sides of what's now Sykes Mountain Road, and I have it circled here, and it became what was recognized as the Vermont State Fairgrounds from 1890 to 1928, and here is a picture of the Vermont State Fair at Billings Park in White River Junction in 1892 with a balloon ascension, with all this stuff. And I had to consider, is a state fair, in fact, performing arts? Well, pie baking, yes, best livestock, yes, crops and so forth, but the Midway was filled with all kinds of performances. And I don't know if you can see this here, but one of the things that obviously attracted a big crowd was what is identified as lady wrestlers. So that's a kind of performing art, and there were all kinds of acts along the Midway, whether it was human curiosities or all kinds of juggling acts and so forth. So that was up in Billings Park. In 1911, to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of Hartford, the people of the town put on a huge pageant. And that was also a very common kind of performing arts at the turn of the century. There would be directors of these pageants that would travel around the country and direct the people of the town. And basically what the story was it would enact in a series of scenes every era of Hartford history. And what was so interesting is that each village contributed to the cast, but they're all the same thing. So that from Wilder, they were the Native Americans. From Hartford, they were the leaders and so forth. And this was a huge event that was held in a place called Pine Point Park, which is now developed for residences. And Pat, it's near the school. I can't remember at the moment what the school is.
It's above Pine Street School,
Yeah.
what's down Worcester Avenue.
Because it was overlooking the river where this pageant was held. Now, so far, we have talked about dance. Well, first, folk music and church music and formal dances, and then vaudeville. than spectaculars like the circus, which came, it wasn't only Barnum. Other imitators of Barnum would come every year, and the Circus Day was a big event. And then finally, as I've discussed, the historical pageant, which again happened in 1927 for the 150th anniversary of the state of Vermont. And it was, again, the people of Hartford really pitched in, made costumes, and did this historical pageant. Now, despite the fact that performing arts were getting more and more professionalized with admission tickets and so forth, or big budgets and so forth, there was another kind of performing arts that basically I have to mention. And that is the Grange movement. There were Granges in Queechee, in Wilder, in Hartford Village, and
West Hartford.
and West Hartford. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now, one of the, I'll talk about what the Grange did in a moment, but I have to say that this is another stream of performing arts that always was present in the town. And I've got a picture here of the Hartford Cornet Band that performed at the Vermont State Fair. And these were all local people, except they had very fancy uniforms and so forth. So there was always a large element of participatory performing arts where people just loved to perform and to play music and do amateur plays for that matter. Now, the Grange was a special case. And the Grange in Queechee met in the Queechee Meeting House on the upstairs, which had originally been a sort of Congregationalist meeting house, and then it became a school and so forth. But in fact, there were, in addition to the meetings that told about the new techniques in farming and so forth, that's the whole idea of the Grange. It was a way that farm families and eventually industrial workers could get together and talk about issues of the day. But at the end of every meeting of the Grange, there was some sort of cultural performance. And I was told by Lester Higgs. Gibbs. You know, I get this name wrong, but it's right in, I always get it between Briggs and Biggs and Higgs. Okay, sorry about that. But he was very active in the Grange and spoke about the talent shows that they would have among particularly younger people. And he remembered not only the fact that he would always remember this young boy who came in with all kinds of oranges and did a juggling act with oranges, and there were oranges flying everywhere. He also remembered that he himself had participated in a talent show at the Cascadneck Grange, the Wilder Grange, sorry, in which he might have been 5 or 6 years old, and he was playing a piano piece. And he couldn't remember the end of the piano piece. And he played it over and over and over again, not ending it until they finally took him, sort of led him off the stage. Another very interesting element, maybe even an archaeological element of the Grange performances, was that every Grange had a painted curtain. And here is the Cascadneck curtain that, I don't know where it is right now.
It's in the Wilder Library.
Oh, okay. Because yeah, okay. Every Grange had this, and basically, in addition to some scene in the middle, there were all the sponsors of the prizes for the talent shows, all the local businesses. And in fact, there is a big project underway throughout Vermont to restore these Grange curtains that were everywhere. So that's the Grange, and that was certainly a popular way that local residents could participate in the performing arts. Now we come sort of overlapping, but to a big one, and that is the movies. Now, the movies really extended in Hartford through all the stages of American cinema history. And it really was a technological advance that transformed everything about live performing arts. Because by the very end of the 19th century, the very first years of the 20th, these electric poles began to appear on South Main Street. From the first electrification that came with the building of the Opera House, everything was lit, thanks to Thomas Edison and the incandescent light bulb. But Thomas Edison also invented the moving pictures. Now, the moving pictures at the beginning weren't in the regular way that even today we see them. Basically, it was very bulky kind of equipment that people would come on the train with what they called the kinetoscope, and they were shown in the Opera House. There was beginning to be a novelty and a technological transformation where in the Opera House, an operator of these moving pictures would come, and that would be an evening's entertainment. And Lyman Howe from New Hampshire was a very, very famous one of these operators who also appeared in the Opera House with these new magic pictures and so forth. But these weren't stories in any sense. They were just the wonder at seeing projected on a screen moving images of trains, of people, and people gasped to see that. And there are famous stories of how when they shot a train coming toward the audience, people would get frightened. Well, the idea of moving pictures being a permanent feature, not just an occasional act, came to be in White River Junction in 1908, when the first Nickelodeon opened, called Dreamland, which was named after a Nickelodeon in Coney Island and so forth. Now, this is it was on Gate Street, right to the, right next to where the Barrett Center for the Arts is right now. And it was just a simple wooden building, and you can see from the pictures here that at first it was more or less like a peep show, where you put in a coin and you would crank it, and you would see these basically moving pictures of all kinds of things. Eventually, it got to be what you see in the lower right, where there were seats, and the motion pictures began to develop stories. And here you have a character from The Great Train Robbery, which is recognized as one of the earliest narrative films. Now, Nickelodeons had a bad reputation. They were like, video parlors or pinball parlors. And there was a lot of discussion in the Landmark about that the lower classes loved to stay in there and smoke and so forth. And there were across the country, because they were very small spaces, fires and all kinds of things. So very soon, the Nickelodeon Dreamland on Gate Street only lasted for a few years because it was replaced by a higher class, what we would call movie house. And that movie house was known as the Crown. And it was a proper theater with a rake and with a sloping floor and so forth. And here you can see the printed program of the Crown, and a picture of Tom Mix and so forth. Now, this building was demolished in something like 2004. It had a long life after it ended being a movie house. It was a bowling alley, miniature golf, roller skating, and so forth. And I'll explain in a moment why that happened. But in the meantime, there was in 1920 a great experience for the people of Hartford, where D.W. Griffith, perhaps the most famous director in America, who had done Birth of a Nation and Intolerance and so forth, in his later career, he started to do sort of corny stuff. And the movie Way Down East is a typical melodrama. And he decided that it should be filmed in the wintertime in Hartford with the dramatic scene of Lillian Gish, the star, being rescued from an ice flow. And in an account of the filming that I found in a catalog of D.W. Griffith's work at the Museum of Modern Art, it was described how D.W. Griffith was such a perfectionist that they had real ice flows, and they put Lillian Gish spread out on the ice flow, and many takes, and her co-star said that she had to be bundled up and so forth. The end of the story is that although many people from Hartford were not only interested in seeing the filming, which you can see here wasn't like a movie set today. It was really a cranked movie projector, but they also waited outside the Hotel Coolidge. Well, it wasn't called, it was still the Junction House at that time, to see the stars, the movie stars, come out. So it was a lot of excitement. But it was a sort of unhappy ending because D.W. Griffith, whose main studios were in Mamaroneck, New York, didn't like the outdoor shots. So he restaged snowstorms, and in fact, he restaged the ice flow scene, the rescue from the ice flow, in Farmington, Connecticut, where he said, the hell with the ice, and he had his people build a wooden ice flow, a wooden platform that was painted white and was sort of in the shape. And so when the movie opened, and I think that it opened in Lebanon first, everybody was disappointed because they didn't recognize any of the scenes except for a very few. Now, I mentioned to you about the Crown Theater as being the first proper movie theater. Now, in 1924, it was purchased from its local owners by a man named Allard Graves, who was the son of an owner of numerous theaters in northern Vermont and sort of centered in St. Johnsbury. And he operated the Crown for a couple of years, while he had a new theater constructed on North Main Street. And in fact, he went so far as to rename the Crown on South Main Street the Lyric, which became the name of his new theater. The new theater was opened in 1926, and when he sold the Crown, he had a codicil in the contract that movies could never be shown in that building again, and that's why it became a bowling alley, miniature golf, all this sort of stuff. No more movies. So he opened what was really a very impressive theater right next to the Vermont Paper Company, right on, at the end of North Main Street, with a sort of Art Deco style and a big hall. It went through several remodelings, but there are still pictures of the ticket booth, and you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but admission was 20 cents for adults and children were 10 cents. And this was the box office. And inside, in the auditorium, was not only the proscenium stage where he featured, in addition to movies, local vaudeville type acts like Teddy and Son, Terrio, and other acts throughout the years. And when we were speaking to some people that remembered the Lyric Theater, which in fact closed in 1970, but it didn't look like this. People remembered the red curtains that were on the stage, and it was really a touch of Hollywood in White River Junction. But when we get to the early 50s, there were problems. There were problems for the movie business, especially a one-screen theater like the Lyric, because not only did people have radio entertainment at home, but television was also beginning to come in. And of course, with the highways and the increasing use of the auto to go here and there, Allard Graves, the impresario of cinema, who eventually owned like 17 theaters throughout New England, decided that he had to change the motif, the venue for movies, so that in the summertime, the Lyric was closed from 1952 onward, and he created the White River Drive-In Theater, also up very close to Sykes Mountain Road. There is between the Vermont State Fair, which ended in 1928, and the beginning of the drive-in, there was, as I'm sure people know, there was an airport there, which eventually closed, and with the land being opened, there was the drive-in. And the drive-in is the source of many, many stories of teenagers, of families taking their children, the children fall asleep, and so forth, like every drive-in. Now that we've sort of gone through the movies, because after the drive-in closed in 1987, which isn't that long ago, because the highways that encouraged the idea of viewing movies in your auto now led to the beginnings of multiplex cinemas, where there could be 8 or 12 screens and people could choose what they want. So that's basically, after 1987, no more movies in White River Junction or Hartford for that matter. Now we're getting close to the end of the story. I'm sorry to be keeping you so long, and that is the rebirth of the regional theater in Hartford, which, as I said at the beginning, is really the core of the performing arts cultural economy in the Upper Valley, centered in White River Junction and Hartford. And I showed you that after the end of vaudeville, downtown, South Main Street, still had the Hotel Coolidge, but as I said, the block, what was then known as the Gates block, was just stores on the ground floor, and basically the upstairs was empty. Very, very few shows, and the shows became impossible after 1938. J.J. Newberry opened a huge sort of supermarket department store, and here you have the grand opening and so forth. And it became so popular that in fact eventually they began to have sales floors and storerooms up in the space of the Opera House. But we'll get to that in a moment. The real beginnings of regional theater started in Quechee in about 1971. Now, there was a group led by a man, a director, an impresario named Robert O'Neill Butler, who created a theater group called the Green Mountain Guild. And there are many, many stories about the Green Mountain Guild, the most famous of which is that Meryl Streep, as a new graduate from Vassar, before she went to the Yale Drama School, spent basically the year 1971 and 1972 living in Quechee and performing in what they called the Quechee Playhouse, which was this wooden building here, which was built as an annex to the original mill building. Now, this is in performing arts, but the Parker Mill originally was much higher. And when it changed hands, it closed in, I think, 1951 or 52, but it was abandoned, and in fact, a new owner demolished the top two floors. But when Quechee Lakes Corporation started to come in, they saw naturally the Quechee Center as a social center for the residents of the new development, and they built this annex. And it was in this annex the Green Mountain Guild performed from about 1971 to 1975. Very popular musicals and so forth. But in about 1976 or 77, something like that, the Quechee Corporation decided enough with the Green Mountain Guild, and they converted this building into offices for Quechee Lakes. So the Green Mountain Guild had to go somewhere, and they found the Quechee Meeting House as the perfect place to perform. And this became the Quechee Playhouse for a short period of time. 78, 79, and a little bit in 1980. The town was not willing to give a permanent lease to the Green Mountain Guild for a public playhouse, so they had to find another place to go. And fortunately enough, one of the most prominent entrepreneurs and civic leaders, Fred Briggs of Briggs Limited, who was a tenant, was able to purchase the building because he was a tenant in one of these things. And the idea occurred that the opera house should be, in fact, renovated in some way. And there was Robert O'Neill Butler, who renamed it the Junction Playhouse. And in 1981, you see the kinds of very popular musicals that he put on in the opera house. Now, our friend and colleague David Briggs was really, really interested in this whole idea of urban revitalization. And after his purchase of the Hotel Coolidge in 1985, he produced a number of very popular shows, including the first one was very soon after he bought the after he was put in charge of the Opera House of Butch Thompson, the Butch Thompson Trio from Prairie Home Companion, and other kinds of performances. And it was sort of tough booking these things one by one in the Opera House. And then in one of those serendipitous occasions, two guys came into town in 1987, Steve Legaviech and Steve Leon, who are known as the two Steves. And they stopped in town. They were there on their way to Burlington for the Lake Champlain Shakespeare Festival, but they had this idea of creating a theater company. And basically, they wanted to see where Meryl Streep had performed, because the Green Mountain Guild had been there. And David Briggs brought them upstairs, and they thought about it. And they decided in the 1988 season they were going to create something called the White River Theater Festival. And in fact, they really did very interesting work. And you can read in the Valley News really great reviews of the ingenuity of how they redid, for instance, Shakespearean plays in the 1950s with the 1950s settings. He wrote, Steve Legaviech was a playwright, and they really made an impression on White River Junction. Unfortunately, they didn't make such a big impression on the economy of the Opera House, because they really depended on ticket sales and a few grants here and there to support what became a growing budget every year. They were artistes, and eventually, I didn't show the sad headlines about how they were basically let go, and the umbrella organization that David Briggs had started, called River Arts, went down in flames. So it was like the Briggs Opera House was left back to the Briggs family, and another serendipitous arrival came in 1997, when a woman named Brooke Wetzel at the time was scouting locations for a film that she was doing, and she needed a set for like a talk show or something. And Matt Dunn was guiding her around and said, "Oh yeah, the Opera House is a great place." She went up expecting it to be an old, musty 19th century theater. In fact, as she told me, she walked up the stairs and went into the theater, and it was like a very modern set that had been progressively improved by first the Green Mountain Guild and then the White River Theater Festival to what it is now, what they call a thrust stage, where the audience sits on three sides. So it's almost like theater in the round. And from 1997 to 2012, she was the artistic director, the managing director, the whole moving spirit behind Northern Stage. In fact, she had started a group in Burlington where she was living and called it Northern Stage, and she just transported the name down. In the report that I hope you will read, there's the whole story of the beginnings of Northern Stage. Now, in 2012, it was time for new blood to basically keep the what was now called the Briggs Opera House, to keep it running and put it on a firmer financial basis. So succeeding Brooke was the former artistic director of the New London Barn Playhouse, Carol Dunn, who is still in that position today. And she hired as managing director, and certainly separated the two functions within Northern Stage, a guy named Eric Bunge, who was a well-known theater manager in Minnesota. And he came, and basically they felt that they needed their own theater space. And so they took the old Bill Miller Cadillac Agency property and built what we now all know is the Barrett Center for the Arts, with the offices in what used to be the showroom. I have a picture that I will include in the report of Bill Miller with an old Cadillac selling all that. Now, David Briggs, if nothing else, was really intent on keeping the Opera House as what May Gates back in 1890 had really envisioned as a civic cultural center. And here, he's sitting right here so you can see him. Here he is in the Opera House, standing explaining to me how basically at that point he began to see that it would be better not to be dependent on one theater group, but to have basically anyone who wanted to perform and that could fit into the schedule to perform there. And among the many things were some very innovative theater groups, like JAG Productions, yes, which is an African-American theater company named after Jarvis Antonio Green, that really did cutting-edge drama. He's hoping they will come back, but also local community theater groups like We the People Theater, that they're now planning their next production, but it began in 2017 with 1776, and the newest edition is JAM, Junction Arts and Media, which is not only taking some of the administrative responsibilities, but Samantha Davidson Green and Chico Eastridge are really moving forces there to really get into digital media. Not only to show on cable TV, I mean they're obligated to tape town hall meetings and so forth, but really to have classes in filmmaking, because everybody today has got a smartphone that is way, way more powerful than anything that D.W. Griffith could have imagined for making films, and everybody has one. So they have classes and lots of activities, and also managed the theater, which JAM has merged with the White River Independent Film Festival every year, which is now in the Briggs Opera House. And I can't end this without mentioning the extraordinary, the weird, the unusual David Fairbanks Ford Main Street Museum, which is a combination of curiosities, of musical events, of Halloween, the Halloween parade, and it has got to be classed as part of the performing arts because David Fairbanks Ford claimed that his artistry now is in public spectacles. And so basically, the last element of this is the latest event, and here's David again, signing a 3-year contract with the Shaker Bridge Theater, which will be doing a certain number of weeks in the year at the Briggs Opera House. And in between those performances, there will be, it's open to dance schools, to all kinds of reviews, and the Christmas special that they have. So, we have now a real thriving performing arts economy in White River Junction, whose effects are throughout not only the whole town of Hartford, but the whole Upper Valley. And as I showed in the very first slide, the cultural economy has all kinds of waves. It has great impact on the town. And there aren't many towns that have made so much progress in a performing arts economy. And I'll just end it with this fact that the arts, culture, and the creative economy are where towns that have lost old style industry and old style business, this is a growth industry to spread prosperity through the whole community on both the talent side and the audience side. So thank you very much for this long journey through the performing arts history of Hartford.
Contacted us. You're doing-
Is that it?
We ran out of years. But I will send you a draft of the 115-page report.
I can
Were
see
you-
that.
Conservation Commission and all its members, and Matt has been wonderful. And as I said, Pat and David have really helped me to sort of put it into some sort of order. So thank you. Yes?
I'd like to just say that this report has got such wonderful information in it. It's going to be one of our main textbooks for people to learn about the history of the town. There's so much stuff in there that even I haven't gone into yet.
Well, I have
So
to.
much research.
I have to agree, because when I took this job, it's going to be easy, but it is like writing the history of the town,
It is.
because performing arts are not just isolated events. They're tied into the times in which they take place, and the tastes of the audience, and the economic changes and so forth. So really, from the first folk music in the 1760s to the success of Northern Stage and the Briggs Opera House now, it's a long journey. It was a long journey. So thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. But I'd like to share one story, a
Sure.
personal one, because I'm old enough now to do that. And I went to one of those circuses down in George Ratcliffe Park with the big tent. And they had actual theater seats in it. It wasn't folding chairs. I couldn't imagine it was 20,000 people, but it was a lot. And the act that night that terrified me, because I was a timid little kid, featured this crazy scenario of two men in Speedo swimming suits with long beards wrestling. And when they came to the stage, I hid under the seats.
Scary.
Yeah.
Sounds scary. But I will say that back in the 1880s and 90s, when they had Barnum come, and of course Buffalo Bill, they had like a train that was like 100 cars long, or several, and they had everything. I mean, Buffalo Bill had just gotten back from touring Europe, so it was bigger than it later got.
And what,
But-
40 bison?
Oh yeah, I mean, eventually, in the imitators of Buffalo Bill, they had recreations of Custer's Last Stand. They had, all kinds of warriors, samurai warriors riding. It was a real spectacle. So anyway, as Carol Dunn said to me, that somehow Hartford, from its very beginnings, always had the aspiration to be a center of more than just, community theater. It was for most of the last, it's 262 years now since the foundation. And the performing arts have been this continuing theme through the whole history.
It's interesting you pointed out that the pageant specialized each village in
Yeah.
terms of their participation. And we didn't know that, but I was the Hartford chairman for the 1976 bicentennial. And we had no tradition for being around here because we were so industrialized. There was nothing really fun to do. We didn't have a swimming pool, a little bit of few trips to Mascoma Lake or the Lebanon pool was all we had. And so people would go away. And so we thought maybe it would be time to turn that on its head. And so myself with a couple of high school kids and a couple of older people, one of whom was Lester Gibbs's mother, Catherine.
Gibbs,
Who was-
I have to remember
Who
that.
was a gem. We conceived that it would be good to have the town have a field day. And so we had it up on the high school field, the complex. That swimming pool by that time had been built. And we titled it Hartford on the 4th, which was a suggestion that you stay home for once. And a couple of things happened. One was that's where the tradition for fireworks began. And so we separated in a way that you had to register in the name of your village to get in. And you could participate in any number of things like sack races and softball throws and a field day, a mini softball tournament, swimming races, a whole myriad of things. And you could participate as often as you wanted, but every time you participated, you had to pay a nickel. And you had to register the name of your village, and every time you did something, your results were recorded, so it was like the Olympics. We had a color dots for every, like the Olympic circles, for every village. And we kept score on a big 4x8 plywood scoreboard. And towards the end of the day, people started filing into the football stands to see the culmination of the whole day and the fireworks. And the culminating event was a round-robin tug-of-war, each village against each other. And the rules were, you had to have 7 people on the team, you had to have 2 women and 1 kid, and the rest could be men. And an iconic family from Hartford Village was in the stands. Their name was Bettis. And it came down to the last event of the night, and it was Hartford Village against Queechee, which is quite a dichotomy in terms of socioeconomic status. And the word rumbled around that if Hartford Village won, they would win the day. And it got to the Bettis family, and they were built like fire hydrants. They tumbled out of the stands and participated and won the tug-of-war. It's kind of an epic moment.
Oh, absolutely. Now, this is a perfect example of the nickels that were contributed didn't pay for the whole thing, but it had another kind of wealth. And that's always been true of the performing arts, that it's not only the economics, although the economics are really important. If you don't have the economics, you can't continue, but it is basically to create a participatory identity for the town that people enjoy.
There was a question or a comment right here.
Yeah, sure.
So did you run across anything about community theater in the 60s? Wasn't there a group called the Hartford Players? They performed at what's now the White River School and then up at the high school when that was built.
Wasn't your father in that group?
Yeah, my parents were John Bogle, Judge Ellison's wife.
The Cole Porter thing?
Yeah, they did Pirates of Penzance, they did Straight Plays,
Anything
George
goes.
Washington Slept Here, anything goes.
You know, it's so hard to find records of if they didn't get reviewed in the Valley News or other newspapers, and if there are no posters, etc., that remain, it's hard to do. I think I have come across them, as well as other theater groups like the Parish Players, and the JCCT in
NCCT.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
NCCT.
neither of those are Hartford though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, we had a great poster of Pirates of Penzance. Oh, God.
But the signature accomplishment of the
No.
Bicentennial Commission was to create Lyman Point Park.
Uh-huh.
That was in 1976. And nothing happened in Lyman Point Park until 1986, when I had taken over the hotel. And through my musical experiences in St. Paul, had inspired a fellow to come here and create what is now called the Yankee Brass Band Festival. And I'm sad to say the maestro with whom I did that passed away last week, so he's on.
Oh, well.
So whenever it comes back to Hartford, we get first dibs on it, and we held it in Lyman Point Park.
And I mentioned that in the report as one of the sites of outdoor entertainment.
But 10 years later, like I say, we promoted it as being in Lyman Point Park, and everybody in town said, "Where's Lyman Point Park?"
Well, I have a picture of that small stage in Lyman Point Park. You know, there's a small open stage there. Okay.
Thank you.
Did you get that? Okay. Enough performing arts. Okay.